People like you ought to learn their place. Then smack. A slap echoed through the courtroom, right in the very space that was supposed to be sacred to justice. No one stopped him. No one spoke up, because the woman being slapped was just a black woman. No judge's robe, no nameplate, just some lady in plain clothes. Because to him, she didn't look like someone who deserved respect. But seconds later, when she turned her head and looked him dead in the eyes, everything in that room shifted. The man had no idea. He had just assaulted Judge Leona Velez, the first black woman ever appointed to the highest judicial seat in the state of New Avalon. And she didn't have to scream to take back justice. She only needed one line. Did you just strike a presiding judge in her own courtroom? What state are you watching this from? And in your state, would justice dare to look truth in the eye? Would anyone have the courage to say, I am the law, and I will not stay silent? Now, let's follow the journey of one slap. That woke an entire city from the lie they called normal. Reed Ridge, New Avalon, an ancient city built on red stone, where towering walls of justice silently bore witness to generations passing by. But that morning, in Courtroom 3 of the Reed Ridge District Courthouse, a single sound shattered everything. A slap, sharp as a whip, loud as thunder. And then, silence. The ceiling fan clicked once, then stopped. A cup of coffee nearly slipped from the hands of a young attorney. Someone dropped a file, and in the center of the room stood Leona Velez, a black woman in her early 50s, her salt and pepper hair tied in a high bun, her dark eyes deep and unfathomable. Frozen like a statue, a blazing red handprint blooming across her left cheek from the unexpected blow. His name was Logan Price, a police lieutenant with the Reed Ridge Police Department. White, 45, third generation in a family of cops, and well accustomed to the belief that anyone not wearing the same uniform as his was beneath him. He thought she was a clerk, an assistant, just another supporting piece in the dull machinery of the justice system. He hadn't looked closely, and even if he had, he likely would have done the same, because men like him aren't used to being challenged, especially not by a woman of color. Logan Price took a half step back, a flicker of surprise crossing his face, but not a word of apology, only a sneer. People like you ought to learn their place. Everyone in the room exchanged glances, paralyzed. But Leona Velez didn't need anyone to speak for her. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't retreat. She simply turned her head, slowly, to face him, her eyes calm but blazing. And in that moment, something in the room shifted. At the transcription desk, the young clerk, Maya Tran, stammered, "Lieutenant, you don't know." But Logan Price was too far gone in his arrogance. He didn't see the empty judge's chair behind him. Didn't realize the woman he just slapped was none other than Judge Leona Velez, the first black woman ever appointed to the highest judicial seat in the state of New Avalon. A living symbol of justice, with over 30 years in the legal field, as defense attorney, prosecutor, and now a guardian of the Constitution. "Lieutenant Price," she said, her voice even and cold as steel, "is this how you treat court personnel while they're performing their duties?" Someone in the back hissed through their teeth, "Oh God, she's a judge." Only then did Logan glance around and see the looks converging on him. Shock, horror, revulsion. No more allies. No badge or rank to shield him now. Judge Leona Velez walked slowly toward the bench. She placed a folder on the table, turned, and faced the courtroom, now completely still. She didn't need a black robe for anyone to know exactly who she was, because true authority needs no introduction. It only needs a moment to reveal itself, like this one. Logan Price stood frozen. His face, once flushed with anger, now began to pale. His fingers twitched by his side, near the holstered pistol, the same one that had always made him feel in control. But now, all the power he once clung to was slipping away like sand through his fingers. Judge Leona Velez had taken the bench, each step echoing like a bell of justice, striking the hearts of those who once believed the law was theirs to wield. She stood tall, hands clasped in front of her, no words wasted, no movement unnecessary, only a silence that pressed down on every soul in that courtroom. Not the silence of absence, but the silence of knowing. Everyone understood what had just happened was more serious than any verdict ever rendered. "Lieutenant Price," she said, "I'll ask this only once. Did you just strike me in this courtroom?" Her voice wasn't raised, but it carried far. Each syllable touched the marble edges of the white columns that upheld the Reedridge District Courthouse. Logan cleared his throat, then muttered, I didn't know who you were." A thin smile appeared on Leona Velez's lips, not out of amusement, but from a bitter familiarity. "Didn't know," she repeated. "Or did you not need to know? Because in your eyes, a black woman in plain clothes wasn't worth your respect?" No one moved, not even Officer Elias Rourke, who had stood beside Logan through dozens of arrests, could meet her gaze. He turned his face away. Judge Velez continued, her voice forged like steel and fire. "You didn't see the badge I wore. You didn't recognize the face that sat on that bench for over 12 years. Not because you're blind, but because you couldn't imagine someone who looks like me holding more power than you." Logan stammered, "I thought you were an assistant, someone without authority, and that," she cut in, not letting him finish, "is the problem. You are a law enforcement officer, yet the only thing you enforce is prejudice." Her gaze lit upon him like a spotlight, not angry but unrelenting. "I've read your file, Lieutenant Price," she said, "and I know this isn't the first time you've crossed a line. I've seen the complaints that vanished from the system, the glitched body cam footage, the reports that were edited." A few murmurs began to ripple at the back of the room. A journalist quietly turned on a camera. No one stopped them, because this moment deserved to be seen, not buried in the dark. Leona Velez looked straight at him, unblinking. "You didn't slap a woman. You slapped the entire system you believe would protect you. But today that system has taken a new shape." Logan swallowed hard, trying to retreat from her gaze, but there was nowhere left to go. Then she turned to Officer Rourke. "I want you to take a statement," she said, "and have security pull footage from the east corner camera in this courtroom." Rourke nodded, his face tight with tension. He knew this wouldn't get swept under the rug like before, because this time, the victim wasn't silent. This time, the one who was slapped held the power to judge. Leona Velez didn't need to raise her voice to command the room. In the breathless stillness of Courtroom 3, her words rang out like a tolling bell against marble walls, cold, precise, and impossible to ignore. "Officer Elias Rourke," she said, "I am ordering you to place Lieutenant Logan Price under immediate detention for assaulting a judicial officer in performance of her duties." Logan jolted, caught between reacting and disbelief. "You can't do this," he growled, trying to cloak himself once more in the familiar veil of authority. Judge Velez lifted her eyes to meet his, the same gaze that had made many a defendant tremble under its weight. "I can," she replied simply, "and I am." Then, turning back to Rourke, "No handcuffs. He's still an active duty officer. I expect proper procedure, but no special treatment." Elias Rourke stepped forward, heavily, a large man. But today, even he seemed diminished by the gravity of the moment. He had stood beside Price in countless takedowns, had shared beers with him after long shifts. But today he had to choose, and he chose the law. He laid a hand gently on Price's arm. "Logan, come with me. Don't make this harder." Price froze, hand trembling slightly. He looked around, searching for an ally, a sympathetic glance, a familiar nod from the system that had always shielded him. But this time, no one answered. Even Nathan Hale, the prosecutor for the day's hearing, turned his face away, eyes locked on the case file in front of him as though it were scripture, though the page had not turned. "You're coming with me," Rourke said again. Price finally moved, slowly, bristling with restrained rage. But not a word left his lips. As the courtroom doors closed behind them, Leona Velez turned to the court clerk, Maya Tran. "Record it clearly in the transcript," she instructed, "that Lieutenant Price admitted to physically assaulting a presiding judge during an active session, and that this court has initiated a criminal investigation on the spot." Maya nodded, her hand shaking but her eyes shining. She knew. Everyone in that room knew. This was no longer a routine court proceeding. This was the beginning of a legal earthquake. Leona Velez turned back toward the judge's bench but didn't sit. She stood still, eyes scanning the gallery, half full, half empty, as reporters raised their cameras, already rolling. Then she spoke again without a microphone. "We are not here to protect anyone's feelings. We are here to protect justice." A few reporters leaned forward. Cameras clicked rapidly. People began to whisper her name. At the defense table, Tyrell Morgan, the teenage boy arrested for graffiti, sat frozen, but the look in his eyes had changed. It was no longer fear. For the first time in his life, someone who looked like him was standing at the highest place in the room, telling him that silence didn't have to be his fate. After the hearing, in an emergency meeting room, Judge Leona Velez sat across from Jonas Kim, the courthouse's senior bailiff. He handed her a thin file, copies of 4 complaints that were buried about Price over the past 5 years, he said. The court was never notified. Leona Velez flipped through the pages quickly, her eyes darkening. "Call the State Office of Internal Affairs," she ordered. "I want a special unit to begin auditing every case Price had a hand in for the last 10 years. Then she paused. "And Jonas?" "Yes. We're not just going to try a slap. We're going to try the entire system that taught him he could do it and walk away." 3 days after Lieutenant Logan Price's detention, the Reed Ridge District Courthouse was no longer just a place for routine hearings. It had become ground zero. Local papers like the Reed Ridge Tribune and New Avalon Ledger ran bold headlines. "Cop slaps judge mid-trial, but a real blow exposed much more." Leona Velez had no time for the news. She was deep in files. The 3rd floor of the courthouse had been converted into a temporary special review center, overseen by her and Special Agent Veronica Steele from the State Office of Internal Affairs. Nearly 200 case files had been pulled from archives, many marked with red seals. Closed, no further action. "What is this?" she asked, pointing to a file with the name blacked out by hand. Veronica frowned. "Civilian assault in Orchard Hill. The accused was Price, but the victim's name was crossed out manually, not digitally. Is there an original copy?" Veronica nodded. "One. It came bundled with a confidential file, a courtroom audio recording from 2019, pulled from the system." Leona Velez stopped flipping pages. "Who pulled it?" "Assistant District Attorney Nathan Hale." She tightened her grip on her glasses, breathing slowly. Hale, the same man who had been in the courtroom when Price struck, the man who lowered his eyes, who didn't intervene. And what's on the tape? The voice of a victim, accusing Price of torturing him in the interrogation room, Veronica said. "But the terrifying part is, someone else on the tape laughed and said, 'Let me take care of this for you.' The name of that person? Unknown," Veronica replied. The voice is male, older, and has a northeastern accent. Leona Velez lifted her head, her eyes sharp as blades. She knew that voice. Gregory Stanton, senior judge, the man who mentored her during her first year on the bench, the one who once declared at a legal symposium, "The law is not just a sword. It is a shield for those who preserve order." She had believed him. Now, she saw that behind the shield was a rotting face. Just as Leona Velez was immersed in the rising tide of evidence and records, Jonas Kim, her loyal bailiff, entered the room, his face pale. "There's someone who wants to see you," he said. "An old acquaintance. You should sit down before I say the name." She frowned slightly. "Who?" Jonas lowered his voice. "Deshaun Keller." Her heart skipped half a beat. That's not possible. Deshaun Keller had been one of Logan Price's earliest victims. 17 years old at the time, arrested under false charges, hospitalized for 2 weeks, then erased from the records after his family withdrew the complaint and left no trace behind. Rumors said the family had been threatened. He was believed to have dropped out of school, left the state, never returned. "Where is he?" she asked. "Downstairs," Jonas said. "And according to him, he's got a video someone once tried to bury forever." 5 minutes later, in the witness waiting room, Leona Velez sat across from a man in his late 20s, tall, broad-shouldered, eyes seasoned by time and pain. "Judge Leona Velez," he said, "there's a video, and I think you need to see it." He unlocked his phone. The screen slowly faded into an image from 2014. Inside an interrogation room, Logan Price, younger but unmistakable, had a teenage boy by the collar, shouting, threats, then a slap. Leona Velez sat motionless. This time, she wasn't the one being struck, but that slap was the kind the system had allowed to happen too many times. "Are you willing to testify?" she asked. "This time, yes," Deshawn replied, "because last time I stayed silent." And he kept going. That night, as the city of Redridge sank into darkness between cobblestone streets and flickering gaslights, Leona Velez sat alone in her office. The desk lamp, the only source of light, cast a narrow beam across a thick case file that lay open like a Bible of exposed sins. She had just concluded a meeting with agents Veronica Steele and Marco Velez. The new evidence from witness Deshawn Keller was rapidly expanding the Price investigation into a web of connections involving major players, including prosecutor Nathan Hale and Judge Gregory Stanton, the very man who once mentored her. But justice, she knew, was never handed over. It had to be seized, and those holding the reins of power wouldn't give them up quietly. The desk phone rang. No caller ID. Leona Velez hesitated, then answered. A man's voice, deep, trying to sound polite. "Judge Velez, some things are better left alone. You know that. This system doesn't exist because it's perfect. It exists because people stay quiet enough to keep it running." "Who is this?" she asked, her voice steady and unmoved. "Someone who used to believe in you. But if you go too far, you'll just be another name erased from history. They won't let you keep that seat. And your family won't be safe either." Click. The next morning, the local digital news lit up with smear campaigns, beginning with the New Avalon Herald and spreading like wildfire to smaller outlets. Judge Leona Velez previously accused of bias. Is she too partial to oversee police-related cases? Troubling links between Leona Velez and a radical civil rights group in the 90s. The articles were coded in honey neutrality, but their blades were sharp, laced with insinuation, ambiguity, and unsourced claims. Just enough to plant doubt. Even local radio shows picked up the story. One familiar broadcaster scoffed into mic. "We're talking about a judge who once marched in college protests, and now she's the one teaching cops how to do their jobs." An old photo of her from her student years, fist raised at protest, was edited, cropped, and spread across social media, emblazoned in red. Justice or politics? Then, the worst happened. At 2:17 p.m., Jonas Kim burst into her office, breathless, clutching his phone. "Judge, a message from your sister. Something's wrong." She jumped to her feet. "What happened?" "Someone sent an envelope to your house. No return address. Inside was a photo of your nephew, riding his bike home. On the back, handwritten, 'Don't make him pay for what you're doing.'" Leona Velez collapsed into her chair. Cold air drifted in through the window, cutting down to the bone. This was no longer an idealistic battle. This was crime. This was a threat. This was covert war. She looked up at Jonas, the man she trusted like family. "Contact the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Call Veronica, too. I want my nephew under protection tonight." She paused. "And Jonas, prepare yourself. They're going to come for my seat. And you're going to let them win?" She shook her head, slowly. "No, but I'm not keeping this seat to protect myself. I'm keeping it to protect justice. If they're going to push me out, I'll make sure they do it under spotlight." That afternoon, Leona Velez stepped out from the courthouse's side entrance. Ahead of her, around 30 reporters stood ready. Microphones raised, cameras rolling, protest signs lifted. One shouted, "Are you afraid of being removed from the bench?" She stopped, turned to face them. Her voice rang out, clear as a verdict. "No, but the people who should be removed aren't sitting in this courthouse." Shutters clicked furiously, and she walked away. Behind her, a hand-painted sign was quietly raised by a black boy, no more than 13. The handwriting was uneven, but the message was weighty. "She's the first to say what's right. Let her stay." On a gray morning, light mist cloaking the streets, the Redridge District Courthouse still ran, as if it were a normal day. But no one truly believed in normal anymore. But that slap, was the kind the system had allowed to happen too many times. "Are you willing to testify?" she asked. "This time, yes," Deschamps replied, "because last time I stayed silent." And he kept going. That night, as the city of Redridge sank into darkness between cobblestone streets and flickering gaslights, Leona Vela sat alone in her office. The desk lamp, the only source of light, cast a narrow beam across a thick case file that lay open like a Bible of exposed sins. She had just concluded a meeting with agents Veronica Steele and Marco Valles. The new evidence from witness Deschamps Keller was rapidly expanding the Price investigation into a web of connections involving major players, including prosecutor Nathan Hale and Judge Gregory Stanton, the very man who once mentored her. But justice, she knew, was never handed over. It had to be seized, and those holding the reins of power wouldn't give them up quietly. The desk phone rang. No caller ID. Leona Velez hesitated, then answered. A man's voice, deep, trying to sound polite. "Judge Velez, some things are better left alone. You know that this system doesn't exist because it's perfect. It exists because people stay quiet enough to keep it running." "Who is this?" she asked, her voice steady and unmoved. "Someone who used to believe in you. But if you go too far, you'll just be another name erased from history. They won't let you keep that seat. And your family won't be safe either." Click. The next morning, the local digital news lit up with smear campaigns, beginning with the New Avalon Herald and spreading like wildfire to smaller outlets. Judge Leona Velez previously accused of bias. Is she too partial to oversee police-related cases? Troubling links between Leona Velez and a radical civil rights group in the 90s. The articles were coded in honey neutrality, but their blades were sharp, laced with insinuation, ambiguity, and unsourced claims. Just enough to plant doubt. Even local radio shows picked up the story. One familiar broadcaster scoffed into mic. "We're talking about a judge who once marched in college protests. And now she's the one teaching cops how to do their jobs." An old photo of her from her student years, fist raised at protest, was edited, cropped, and spread across social media, emblazoned in red. Justice or politics? Then, the worst happened. At 2:17 p.m., Jonas Kim burst into her office, breathless, clutching his phone. "Judge, a message from your sister. Something's wrong." She jumped to her feet. "What happened?" "Someone sent an envelope to your house. No return address. Inside was a photo of your nephew, riding his bike home. On the back, handwritten, 'Don't make him pay for what you're doing.'" Leona Velez collapsed into her chair. Cold air drifted in through the window, cutting down to the bone. This was no longer an idealistic battle. This was crime. This was a threat. This was covert war. She looked up at Jonas, the man she trusted like family. "Contact the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Call Veronica, too. I want my nephew under protection tonight." She paused. "And Jonas, prepare yourself. They're going to come from my seat. And you're going to let them win?" She shook her head, slowly. "No, but I'm not keeping this seat to protect myself. I'm keeping it to protect justice. If they're going to push me out, I'll make sure they do it under spotlight." That afternoon, Leona Velez stepped out from the courthouse's side entrance. Ahead of her, around 30 reporters stood ready. Microphones raised, cameras rolling, protest signs lifted. One shouted, "Are you afraid of being removed from the bench?" She stopped, turned to face them. Her voice rang out, clear as a verdict. "No, but the people who should be removed aren't sitting in this courthouse." Shutters clicked furiously, and she walked away. Behind her, a hand-painted sign was quietly raised by a black boy, no more than 13. The handwriting was uneven, but the message was weighty. "She's the first to say what's right. Let her stay." On a gray morning, light mist cloaking the streets, the Redridge District Courthouse still ran, as if it were a normal day. But no one truly believed in normal anymore. Downstairs in the basement, once an aging archive that smelled of dust and old ink, a new front had been established. A quiet but fierce counteroffensive. Leona Velez stood between rows of dark wooden shelves, alongside Agent Veronica Steele and Agent Marco Valles. each holding thick orange tag files marked urgent, review, price linked. "We're digging graves," Marco murmured, half joking. "But instead of bones, we're unearthing records that buried the truth." "Careful," Veronica said with dry smirk. "There's more than bones in here. There's a whole network." Before them lay 193 cases where Logan Price had played a role as arresting officer, key witness, or report author. Of those, 117 cases had never gone to trial. 52 cases were dismissed mid-proceeding. 16 convictions were secured solely on Price's independent testimony, meaning just his word alone. Leona Velez stared at one name, Darius L. McKinney, a 19-year-old black man sentenced to 7 years for assaulting a law enforcement officer. In the file, a line from the report read, "Defendant struck Lieutenant Price with his hand during transport." Attached was a photo of Darius. A black eye, split lip, shoulder clearly dislocated. "Assaulted?" Leona, Velez growled. "Or beaten until disfigured while not resisting?" Veronica opened her laptop, typing rapidly. "Do we have any camera footage from that day?" Leona Velez asked. "No," Veronica replied. "Filed as a storage failure. But we do have a clip from the detention area cam, saved by a tech who was testing lighting." The footage was grainy but clear enough. It showed Price dragging Darius into a room, blocking his attorney from entering. Then, after the door closed, screams. Leona Velez didn't need anything more. "We start here," she said. "The McKinney case will be our opening move." The next day, Judge Leona Velez stood before a temporary federal judicial oversight committee, presenting a list of 43 cases for immediate review. At the same time, Veronica and Marco launched a full-scale data audit, using legal AI tools to cross-reference testimonies, identify inconsistencies, analyze voice recordings, and extract redacted segments from archive media. One match hit, a 2017 case where Price, under oath, claimed the suspect tripped and struck his face on the courthouse steps. But ATM footage from a nearby bank told a different story. Price shoving the man with both hands. The victim fell, head slamming against the concrete curb. Leona Velez printed the still frame from the video, hand-delivered it to the deputy director of the State Office of Internal Affairs. "And what do you tell those families?" she asked. "That their sons tripped?" As files were opened, one by one, an anonymous email hit the Federal Internal Affairs Network. Subject line, "You'll never find that video because the judge ordered it destroyed." Attached, a document bearing the signature of Gregory Stanton, the senior judge who once mentored Leona Velez. She went still as her eyes met the familiar signature. Stanton hadn't just known. He had sanctioned it. He wasn't protecting the system, she whispered. He was the system. That weekend, while Reed Dridge still slept beneath the chill of early November winds, media outlets across the state were blindsided by an unexpected federal press release. The Reed Dridge District Court is officially reopening 43 cases connected to former Lieutenant Logan Price. Of those, 12 already show signs of serious procedural violations. Individuals involved in evidence suppression, record tampering, or abuse of authority are now under investigation, and one senior judge has been suspended. 3 days after the federal press release, the press briefing room at the Reed Dridge District Courthouse was no longer just a space for investigation updates. It had become a media frontline. Cameras, microphones, spokespersons, reporters from local CNN affiliates to independent YouTubers, all crammed together, competing to break the latest updates from what was now a statewide reckoning. At the center of it all, as always, stood Judge Leona Velez, her face resolute, her gaze calm, like someone holding a map in the eye of a storm. She stepped up to the podium. No spokesperson, no script. Leona Velez spoke for herself, with her real voice, with the truth. "I know many of you are waiting to see whether I will step down. I will not step down. We don't need more silence. We need light." In the courthouse's internal coordination room, Agent Veronica Steele stood beside Jonas Kim, both watching the live feed on a large screen. "She's playing politics," Veronica murmured. "No," Jonas replied, eyes fixed on the screen. She's exposing politics. On day 5, during a live segment Read Ridge Tonight, where Judge Velez was being interviewed about the investigation and reopened cases, an unexpected disruption occurred on air. Just as the anchor raised the topic of high-level officials potentially enabling misconduct, the screen flickered, breathed static, then suddenly switched to a short audio clip. Leona Velez is not a woman of justice. She is a radical operative who once went by the name Clara May, a threat to the judicial system. The name Clara May appeared in bold across the screen, a name only a handful of people had ever known. It was her original name during her student years in California, when she still used her mother's surname. She had changed it to Leona Velez after graduating law school and entering New Avalon's judicial system. The studio descended into chaos. The segment was cut. The screen went black for a few seconds, then returned to program logo. But the clip had already been recorded and spread like wildfire across social media. Within minutes, toxic hashtags exploded. Hashtag expose Leona Velez, hashtag radical judge, hashtag fake justice. That night, in a secure office under heightened protection, Leona Velez sat surrounded by federal agents. They know I was involved in civil rights work in college. She said calmly, they think using my old name is enough to erase everything I've done since. Veronica frowned. This isn't just retaliation. This is orchestrated media interference. We're seeing encrypted signal traces from a server outside the state. Someone's coordinating this campaign. Marco Velez placed a folder on the table. And here's who's paying for it. A political action committee called Freedom First PAC. They're funding the anti-Velez ads running on TV. Chair of the board, Jonas interjected, is Deputy Mayor Caldwell. Leona Velez looked around at the group. Her face remained composed, but her voice was slow, deliberate, unshakable. Good. Now we know the battle isn't just in the courtroom. It's in the halls of power. 3 days later, Leona Velez released a public open letter to the entire state. It was read aloud during a live session of the State Judicial Council. They say I'm a threat to the system, but if the system fears the light, then maybe what it fears isn't me, but the truth. I am Judge Leona Velez, and I am not afraid. The clip went viral within 48 hours. Independent outlet True Watch reported over 2.3 million views, with tens of thousands of supportive comments. A group of young attorneys launched a movement, hashtag Justice with Leona Velez, calling for her to remain on the bench. Amid the chaos, a quiet message was sent to the inbox of the Office of Internal Affairs. Just one line. If she doesn't back down, next time there won't be a warning. Veronica read it, then turned to Leona Velez. Are you going to stop? Leona met her eyes. They thought I stood at the bench just to read verdicts. They forgot I can rewrite the rules. On the morning of December 14th, Lieutenant Logan Price was officially sentenced in federal court in the Reed Ridge District after 6 public hearings that spanned over 3 weeks. The courtroom was filled with federal investigators, journalists, and independent civilian observers. His once proud, cold face now looked hollow, drained by time and truth. No more arrogance, no more uniform, just a man standing before justice. During proceedings, a wave of evidence and witness testimony was presented, including surveillance footage from the courtroom clearly showing Price slapping Judge Leona Velez without any mitigating circumstances. Testimony from Deshaun Keller, a former victim of Price's brutality, accompanied by video retrieved from an old hard drive. Cross-reference data analysis between case files, revealing that Price had altered official statements in at least 9 separate cases. Digital evidence from Price's personal hard drive, including emails instructing subordinates to clean up the reports. Crucially, 2 of Price's subordinates agreed to cooperate with the investigation in exchange for immunity from prosecution. They provided detailed testimony about Price receiving direct orders from an advisor linked to the deputy mayor's office. Instances of Price being covered while rewriting official statements, including at least 3 cases verified by the former district attorney's office under Nathan Hale. The jury found Lieutenant Logan Price guilty. Sentence: 22 years in federal prison. No parole, no special consideration. The news spread like wildfire. But Leona Velez knew this was not a victory. This was a hinge. Within a week of the verdict, the Federal Judicial Oversight Commission reopened 143 cases, including 12 that had been previously closed under Price's investigations and Judge Stanton's internal rulings. Deputy Prosecutor Nathan Hale, the man who sat silently in the front row the day of the infamous slap, resigned, citing professional strain and loss of public confidence. But a memo from the Office of Internal Affairs confirmed he would face a criminal investigation for conspiracy to falsify official court records. Police Chief Roderick Barnes, under growing pressure from the media and civil rights groups, consented the Department of Justice oversight of the Reed Ridge Police Department for the next 18 months. It marked the first time in over 50 years that a law enforcement agency in New Avalon was placed under direct federal supervision. At the Reed Ridge Courthouse, a temporary notice appeared outside Courtroom 2. All hearings previously presided over by Judge Gregory Stanton are suspended pending review for judicial fairness. No one said it aloud, but everyone knew Stanton had fallen. As for Deputy Mayor Caldwell, named in Agent Veronica Steele's investigative report, he too was summoned by the Federal Commission, though he initially denied all involvement. An internal email surfaced, signed by him, authorizing budget approval from Freedom First PAC, directly linking him to the smear campaign against Judge Leona Velez. Shortly before Logan Price's sentencing, the Federal Commission announced the launch of a separate investigation into Deputy Mayor Caldwell for obstruction of justice, funding public misinformation campaigns, and collusion with law enforcement to manipulate judicial outcomes. That night, under the soft golden glow of her office lamp, Leona Velez was quietly reviewing the list of 43 newly reopened civil cases when the phone rang. Not an unknown number. Stanton. Clara, he said, intentionally using her old name. Leona Velez, she corrected him, her voice calm as water. I'm not calling to justify anything, he said. Just to ask, was it worth it? A whole life, just to become a hammer that shatters the very foundation you once stood on. She paused. I'm not shattering the foundation, she replied. I'm just cleaning up the mess. You know what's coming next, he said, and I still choose to stay. He sighed. Then, good luck. She hung up before he could say anything else. Outside, the city slept under cold rain. But inside, she knew a new fire had been lit. The next day, media outlets reported, an independent federal commission has been formed, led by Agent Veronica Steele and 2 other honorable judges. Its mission, to reform the New Avalon judicial system from the ground up. Those who once thought, this is just a scandal, were beginning to realize this wasn't a storm. It was a season of justice turning over its leaves. 3 weeks after Logan Price's sentencing, the state of New Avalon judiciary held a special session to honor individuals who had contributed to the recent justice reforms. Among those recognized, Agent Veronica Steele, investigative journalist Tanya Brooks posthumously, and Judge Leona Velez, not only for knowing the law, but for having the courage to wield it as a torch, to illuminate the darkest corners of the system. Behind the podium, the state flag stirred gently in the breeze. In the front row, people, many of whom had once been harmed by injustice, wiped quiet tears from their eyes. Leona Velez stepped up. No script, no lofty declaration. Just one opening sentence that silenced the entire room. I'm not here to be retained. I'm here to say goodbye. A wave of whispers rippled like surf against stone. But she raised her hand slightly, and the room stilled again, bound by respect. I will step down from my position as judge of the Reed Ridge District Court. Not because I'm tired. Not because I've lost. I do this because I believe real change doesn't come from a name. It comes from a generation willing to carry it forward. Her voice dropped lower. If a system needs one person to stand in order to hold, then the system was flawed from the start. I don't want to be a pillar. I want to be the foundation for someone else to build higher. Applause filled the chamber, not raucous, but slow and solid, a steady heartbeat of shared conviction. That night in her office, Leona Velez opened a wooden drawer and placed her silver-plated judicial badge into a red velvet box. On the desk, she left behind a small handwritten note for her successor. When you sit in this chair, never forget, power doesn't come from the height of the bench, but from the depth of truth you dared uncover. At the door, Jonas Kim stood quietly, eyes slightly red. "What will you do next?" he asked. Leona Velez gave a soft smile. "I'll teach, train young judges. I'll speak to law students. I'll plant seeds, because I know great trees don't grow from fortresses. They rise from soil that was once stepped on." She turned to glance at her office one last time. No tears, only the calm of someone who wasn't leaving power, but leaving a legacy. 3 months after Leona Velez officially stepped down from the bench, Reed Ridge looked very much the same, and yet entirely different. The building still stood. The marble columns of the Reed Ridge District Courthouse still towered. The heavy black iron gate still opened every morning, just as it had for 100 years. But what had truly changed were the eyes. People no longer passed the courthouse with lowered heads. They looked up straight on the courthouse's west wall. A large mural had just been completed, painted by students from the local art school. It depicted a black woman, her salt and pepper hair tied high, her gaze piercing, standing before a gate of light opening behind her. Beneath the image, a caption read, "Justice doesn't begin in a courtroom. It begins when someone dares to say no." In a small lecture hall at New Avalon Law School, Leona Velez, now an honorary professor, stood before a class of over 60 students. She didn't teach statutes. She told stories. That year, a police officer slapped me in the middle courtroom. He didn't know I was a judge, and he didn't care. But what mattered more was this. The system around him didn't care either. Not because there weren't laws, but because too many people chose silence. A student raised their hand, voice trembling. "Were you scared?" Leona Velez nodded. "Yes, scared for my nephew. Scared for those who will walk into the system after me." She paused and smiled. "But if we all wait until we're no longer afraid to speak, then no one will ever say anything." In the city's central square, a group of young people organized a community event. Transparent Justice Day, the first in New Avalon's history. On a temporary stage, Tyrell Morgan, the 17-year-old once wrongfully arrested that fateful day, stood at the microphone. "I don't know much about the law," he said. "I just know that day, someone stood up for me. And because of that, I still have a chance to grow up." A slap, a moment that once seemed small, almost ordinary, but it didn't strike flesh. It struck the structure, the brittle trust long fractured. And because one person refused to accept that slap as destiny, an entire city began to hear the voice of justice again. Leona Velez no longer stands at the bench, but her footsteps remain in the courthouse halls, in the case files now amended, and in the voices of those who once thought, "I don't have a right to speak." Now they know. They do.